Okay, welcome everyone again to part 2 of our EAS short course on food regulations in the EU. We welcome back today Michael Hickey, who is our presenter and expert in this area. He is based in Ireland. He has a wealth of experience. Those of you who were able to join us yesterday, which I think with the exception of one person I can see in the audience, everyone was here yesterday. I offered at the end of yesterday's session, if you think of any questions that you would like to ask that you didn't get to yesterday, just raise your hand and I'll be glad to call on you to unmute your microphone. As we wait for those, Michael did want to add a little bit of additional information on the question regarding dietary supplements in the EU. So Michael, why don't you take it away there, and then I will monitor the audience and just see if we get any other questions before you get started on today's presentation.
Yes, thank you, Amy, and welcome back, everybody. Good morning to those of you again in North America, and greetings to all of those of you in other parts of the world where it might be evening or night or whatever. And yes, it was a very interesting question on food supplements yesterday. I haven't included in this presentation because it's a relatively specialized area. But there is EU legislation on that. And of course, some other EU legislation always impinges on it. But the main piece of legislation is Directive 2002/46/EC on the approximation of the laws of the member states relating to food supplements. There's a consolidated version, and that's up to the 26th of July 2017. It's available online. It's not a very, on your elect. It's not a very long document. I think there are 14 pages on it. Now, the one thing to mention at the start is it's a directive. And if you remember from yesterday, directives are not directly applicable in member states. They have to be incorporated into the national legislation by way of whatever suitable legislative instruments are commonly used in the countries, and they do vary. The other thing about directives is that the objectives of the directives are laid down, as I said, but not necessarily all the details, and that's really why I want to come back to it. There is a definition in the directive. I won't read it out. It says what is a food supplement, but it goes on for about 5 lines of writing. It lists vitamins and minerals and their chemical forms permitted for the use in the manufacture of supplements. And additional vitamins and minerals may be considered for inclusion in the list, but that would be following evaluation of the appropriate scientific dossier concerning the safety and bioavailability of these individual substances by EFSA, which we discussed yesterday. It's also intended that maximum levels for vitamins and minerals in food supplements will be developed, but my understanding is that they're not there yet. But the substances that you can use are there, and you're limited to them unless they're subsequently added to it. And there are then substances that are not allowed, like there's one mentioned here in the Fedra herb and its preparations and so on. I won't go into all of this. You're not allowed also to have an unauthorized novel food as a supplement. And then there are special labeling requirements that I won't go into. It's also governed by nutritional claims, nutrition and health claims. So you can't make a claim unless that's permitted under the appropriate regulation that I will mention later on. But there are differences in notification of the authorities of a member state. Some countries, some member states require notification before you import it and put it on the market in that member state. I haven't checked this out thoroughly. I know Ireland is one of the countries that requires such notification. You don't get authorization to it. You just have to notify them, and you have to fill in an online notification thing, which requires you to send on, as I said yesterday, a copy of the label. That may not be necessary in all member states. If, of course, the duty is to notify the competent authority for an imported product, that obligation falls on the EU-based importer. And a list of the competent authorities in all member states of the EU and in the EEA states, that's Norway, Iceland, Norway, and so on, is available on a link that you can get quite easily if you check it. If anybody wants it, I'll send it on to them afterwards. I just wanted to mention that because it raises the interesting point of directives versus regulations. Most of the time, and most of the main topics are dealt with by regulation, but be careful as regards directives, because you may have to resort to national legislation if there are differences, and you only find that out with experience. So if anybody wants to come back on that afterwards, or do slot in the question to Amy there. I haven't that much more detail on it at the moment, but I think it would be useful to you for that now. Again, today we're going to cover.
Michael, sorry to interrupt, and I apologize when I clicked on the,
okay.
Question that somebody sent in. Would you mind just repeating the document?
Yes.
That you referenced earlier, and let me get you back to slide number 2.
Well, two things are the directive. Really, you'll be able to search for it on the Eurolex website if you put in the year 2002, the number 46, and also saying that it's a directive. And it's on the approximation of the laws of the member states relating to food supplements. I suspect you'll find it easily if you do Google search for food supplements EU anyway. Okay, now I need a little bit of help from Amy here, because can we get quickly to the next slide, which we would have, which will be part 2. I think it will be 60 something.
You should be able to, as soon as I mute my mic again, you should be able to go ahead and take control of the screen just by clicking on it like yesterday. So okay, just right, mute and then, yep. All right, so I'm gonna.
No, I
oh, you're going backwards.
Sorry about this.
Oh, my apologies. Okay.
I should have done this earlier.
Okay.
I more or less know where it will be anyway. Yeah, we're practically there now. I've gone too far. Right. So
okay, let me mute my mic and then you're on.
Now we're into part 2. Sorry about the slightly false start, but now we should be in business for the rest of the day. I need to take it back again now. Okay. So I'm going to start with EU hygiene legislation. I'm going not to go too deeply into this, because this could take us almost 2 sessions rather than 1, and certainly not a part of a session like today. But basically, and we saw some of this yesterday, the food hygiene regulation structure emanates, if you like, from Regulation 178/2002. For brief, a title, I call it the General Food Law here. And some of these regulations are aimed at the competent authorities, that's the people who enforce the regulations. And the other side is for the food business operators, which are the details that you'll require as a food operator. Of course, you could get access to the others and you can look at them, and that tells you what you want to do. But I'm going to focus only on Regulation 852/2004, which is the general rules for hygiene, and Regulation 853/2004 on specific rules for food of animal origin. I mentioned Regulation 2075/2005, which sets microbiological criteria for foods, but I'm not going to go into that. And I know there's one regulation there that I'll mention on the other side, that's Regulation 2017/625. That's the one that addresses things like health certificates and so on like that, and what the authorities have to do. So that's a new regulation. The earlier one, I won't give you the number because it would confuse you, but it was a 2004 regulation. So Regulation 852/2004, the full title of it is there. It's the general requirements for all foodstuffs. The general obligation, of course, is, not surprisingly, that FBOs shall ensure that all stages of production, processing, and distribution under their control satisfy the relevant hygiene requirements laid down in this regulation. And that's stated in Article 3. I didn't really define FBOs yesterday. It's a short term for describing the person who's responsible, or the company or whatever, that's responsible for putting the products on the market in the EU. Could be an importer, it could be a manufacturer who puts them on directly themselves, it could be their distributor, could in fact be a retailer, it could be an agent acting for a company, or it could be a company from another member state, but which has an office or an address in the EU. There's a requirement to put HACCP in place. It says simply, food businesses shall put in place, implement and maintain a permanent procedure or procedures based on HACCP principles. And then the FBO the business operators shall cooperate with the competent authorities in accordance with other applicable community legislation, or if it doesn't exist, with national law. So you've got to be a little bit careful that some countries may have particular bits, but in general, if you follow what's in this on the general area of food, you'll be fine. Come back to foods of animal origin in a minute. Now, it has general and specific hygiene requirements. The food business operators must adopt the following specific measures: compliance with the microbiological criteria for foodstuff. That's their regulation that I mentioned earlier, 2075/2005, just as a list of foods and list of the microbiological criteria using large M, small m, C, and what's the other one you have in that? The number of samples and the number that have to pass. B, implement procedures necessary to meet the targets set to achieve the objectives of this regulation, which is 852/2004. It also, of course, has things in compliance with temperature control requirements, maintenance of the cold chain, and the sampling and analysis of food. And again, as regards imports, the relevant requirements of food law referred to in Article 11, Regulation 178/2002, shall include the requirements laid down in Article 3 and 6 of this regulation also. We went through these yesterday. There were the various headings that you either had to have similar equivalents or subject to agreement. Food imported into community for placing in the market within the community shall comply with the relevant requirements of food law and so on, recognized by the community. I've put that in, that's just to highlight that for you because you're based there outside in tons of countries. Then the regulation in itself, I'm not going to go through in detail. I've mentioned some of the main points there, but you need to really go through it. It's, well, it's understandable, but it's long and complicated. But then I remember I spoke about appendices yesterday. Well, this appendix lists the various chapters which are addressed in detail in the annex. In other words, the general requirements for food premises, specific requirement in rooms where foodstuffs are prepared, treated, or processed, and that can be a factory floor, it can be a preparation room, it can be anywhere. Chapter 3 covers the requirements for movable and/or temporary premises such as marquees, market stalls, mobile vehicles, etc. Probably of not great relevance to you, but very much of importance, I can tell you, to the authorities here, because there are more problems caused in those areas than anywhere else. And also covers vending machines where hygiene can be an issue. Just think of ice cream in that context. And you have many very nice groups in the US who sell ice cream on a very wide scale, probably even more so than in Europe. I leave the Italians out of that. I think they possibly eat more than in the US. Then there are transport and, both the vehicles and the containers that are used for transporting foodstuffs. Equipment, with which food comes into contact. That's the hygiene of those, the hygiene of that equipment. Not to the great extent, well, yes, it comes in on specific foods, but not so much on the design of them, even though that's relevant as well, of course, because the design must be safe and the product coming out of it must be safe. Also addresses handling food waste, also deals with the water supply for the FBOs particularly. Personal hygiene, of course, the provisions applicable to foodstuffs, the provisions applicable to the wrapping and packaging of foodstuffs, also general requirements as regards heat treatment, and then staff training. You can see also a close similarity of that with ISO standards and also some of the private standards to do with food safety and so on. There is a guidance document. I think this is still available if anybody wants it. It's quite, goes back quite a bit now, but it contains a lot of detail that is intended at least to put a context in the kind of legalese language you get in the directives themselves. I'm quite happy to share a copy of that with anybody who would like to see it. As I said, I don't think it's been updated for quite a while, so it may not contain all the niceties of the amendments to that regulation. There's also guidance in the Commission notice on the implementation of food safety management systems covering prerequisite programs and procedures based on the HACCP principles, including the facilitation / flexibility of the implementation in certain food businesses. These are usually small companies where the absolute compliance with the letter of the law could be quite challenging. I've never really done very much work in that area, so I have no great experience of what the nitty-gritty of that is. But it covers, it's to facilitate and harmonize the implementation of the EU requirements on prerequisite programs and HACCP-based procedures by providing practical guidance. It's the document reference up there, by the way, 2016-C278/01. That will allow you, I think, to find it on Eurolex. It also covers things on the link between PRPs and HACCP-based procedures within food safety management systems. It's on the implementation of prerequisite programs, Annex 1, on the implementation of classical HACCP-based procedures, Annex 2, on the flexibility provided for certain establishments by EU legislation relating to the implementation of PRPs and HACCP-based procedures, Annex 3. And it is mainly directed at competent authorities to promote a common understanding among them of the legal requirements. But of course, it should also help food business operators to implement the requirements after the establishment of specific adaptations and without prejudice to their primary responsibility in the matter of food safety. I'll summarize that by saying it's a great help as regards due diligence. The guidance provided in this document is also in line with the in line with the following international standards, which I mentioned earlier anyway, which can be additionally used as a source material on the implementation of food safety management systems. These include the Codex Alimentarius standard and the general principles for food hygiene, CAC/RCP 1/1969. You can get that on the Codex Alimentarius website, and of course international standard 22,000, and some of the subcategories of that as well. The 2000 now to 22,000 is the one which outlines food safety management systems along the food chain, with the focus on enterprises processing and manufacturing food. And in addition to this FSMS standard, ISO has produced a number of standards focusing in more detail on specific areas of FSMS. And these are the prerequisites, and also on traceability is covered in a separate document. I know various people have contacted me about these. You know, I have ISO 22,000 and I have, you know, traceability ISO 2205. Yes, there's a similarity, but you need to make sure that you comply with what's in the EU legislation, but there shouldn't be any major differences. I have never specifically done the comparison, so I can't say that as an absolute statement. Now, that's basically what I want to go through on the general hygiene one. I'm now going to do, I think it's one slide, I may have to, on Regulation 853/2004. This one lays down specific hygiene rules for food of animal origin. Sorry, there's at least 2 slides because I know why I have that there. The first one is that they supplement those laid down by Regulation 852/2004. That means they either expand or are additional to what's laid down in the general hygiene one. The requirements apply to unprocessed and processed products of animals' origin, but not to other foods containing ingredients of animal origin, right? What that means is that they don't necessarily apply to, if you're doing, we'll say, I don't like quoting examples off the top of my head, but if you're doing a pizza with some kind of meat topping, but lots of other ingredients as well, that would be, if you like, a food containing ingredients of animal origin. But you've got to make sure that the meat or the cheese or whatever meets the requirements of this regulation. Even if you don't do it yourself, you must make sure that your suppliers do so. But importantly for this, and I mentioned this already, the premises must be registered and approved. That's in the EU, but also they must be either regarded as equivalent, or there's an agreement that they're equivalent, or they have a process they're equivalent. And I mentioned yesterday, at least on the dairy side, you can access them through the FDA at your end. These products must have either a health mark or an identification mark. I don't give you an example of that. It usually is, it's headed with the country digraph code, or yeah, I think they're all digraphs. Ireland would be IE. The product from Germany would be DE. A product from Denmark would be DK. The health mark is used for meat where the animals undergo ante or post-mortem inspection by an official veterinarian. And an identification mark is used in the case of other products of animals' origin, except eggs produced in an approved premises. There is a separate regulation dealing with the labeling of eggs. Sorry, that's my fault. I doubt if any of you will be exporting eggs directly to the EU, but and I think that just applies to eggs. I don't think it applies to egg products, but that's subject to checking out before you follow that exactly. And then, very importantly, Annex 3 has the hygiene rules for specific foods of animal origin. And this is an interesting list. There's 15 of them. Some of them are obvious, and some of them you say, what the hell is that? But anyway, the meat of cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, and horses. Now, I've spelled out some of these, and there are only some of them. They're in the regulation. I think there's a mention of domestic ungulates, which are animals with hooves. Large mammals with hooves, I think, is the definition. Whether a pig is a large animal, large mammal or a small mammal, I won't go into. And then you have meat from poultry, which is fine. We all know what poultry is. But then they mention lagomorphs. And lagomorphs include rabbits, hares, and peacocks, sometimes called rock rabbits or conies, which are not rodents, but rodent-like relatives of rabbits and hares. I have never seen a peacock or a rock rabbit or a coney, but I think you may have seen them in the US. But they are on the market in Europe. They're produced and grown and so on. Then you have the meat of farmed game. I won't go into that. These are a sort of, farm game or game that's raised on an enclosed area. And wild game are those that are out in the open. You include pheasant, grouse, duck, geese probably, and so on. Then you have section 5, because it's a category which quite often has more problems, which is meat preparations and MSM. I think mechanically something meat, recovered meat, or system meat, or something like that. The one that's washed off when you've taken off all the meat, you can take easily. And section 6 is meat products, which probably include all these fermented meats, or dried meats, or cured meats, and sausage, luncheon meat, and all these sorts of things. The names of these vary across the world. Then you have live bivalve mollusks. You have fishery products, which are the usual, what I call the usual fish. And then you have section 9, which is raw milk and dairy products, which is the one that I probably know most about. And that includes colostrum, by the way, which is used as an ingredient in some countries in the EU, not too many, I think. Section 10, eggs and egg products. Section 11, frogs, legs, and snails. Well, France is a country in the EU, and they eat frogs, legs, and escargot. And indeed, other countries do as well. A lot of these, by the way, are reared. You don't go out and catch live frogs. I don't know whether they collect wild sails or not, but they're often raised on farms, and as well. And then you have rendered animal fats and greaves. Now, rendered animal fats, I think we understand, and I think greaves is the protein bit. When you render the bits of the meat that you can't do it, I think it includes things like well, they have in the UK anyway. The skins of pork that you can some people eat as foods, and so on. And then gelatine, or gelatin, depending on which way you spell it, and collagen. Sorry, I'm using the wrong button today, Anna. So if you're interested in any of these, you pick on your section of the Annex 3 and see exactly what's required there, and it should all be there, or it should be all among the ones that are there. If you have, poultry meat, or if you have the meat and mince meat and meat products and so on, you pick the right one for yourself. Now, as I said, we could spend the rest of the day on that, but I don't, it's you go into it, you see what's required, you get your details, and you follow them. That's basically it. Fortunately, again, there is a guidance document. Again, it's quite an old one. I have the date of that one, I know, because it's on my one. It's 2005. It at least gives you what was there at the start. It hasn't changed enormously. These are, they are updated. You can get the latest consolidated version, but they don't necessarily update these. And there are plenty of other sources of information there as well. And these are just ones that are produced by the EU. They can be handy to demonstrate due diligence as much as anything else. A lot of this is common sense, but as I said, it's not easy getting products of animal origin into the EU from third countries. But it's exactly the same. It's not easy to get products from the EU into the US, because you've got to have mutual recognition of the plants at EU level by the US authorities and by the EU authorities, the Food and Veterinary Office usually, in the case of exporting products into Europe or importing products into Europe from a third country. So I'll pause for a few moments at this stage, Amy, and hand back to you to see if anybody has a particular question on that. I've gone over this pretty quickly, because if we were to go any more into it, we would spend probably an hour. And I just want to give you, if you like, a taste or an overview of what's in there and how you can look up your specific detail in it. Almost every question that anybody will have will be specific to their products. And, I'll hopefully be able to give a general answer today, maybe a slightly more detailed one with a bit of consideration afterwards.
Okay, Michael, I don't see any raised hands. Anyone raise your hand if you do have a question, please. Okay, I'll mute and you can take it again.
So I'm going on to cover what I've called as a general heading, food labeling in the EU. You'll see why I do that, again, because there are a number of regulations that I'm going to mention, and there are many others, in fact, that may impinge on food labeling as well. The general labeling one is Regulation 1169/2011. That's often referred to as the FIC regulation. You'll see in a minute why it's called the FIC regulation. This replaced a series of earlier food labeling directives. I think the first one was 1979. When it was brought in, that was the first EU food labeling directive. Then you had the next one was, I think, something like 2001. I should know it because I quoted it often enough. But then in 2011, they brought in this slightly broader title of Food Information for Consumers Regulation. That's what FIC stands for. Now, prior to that, there's a directive on nutritional labeling, which is 90/496. That is still there, and that's still slightly relevant, even though many of the requirements are anyway in 1169/2011, which is the main one. And I'll be discussing that in detail, so don't worry about that. Except where there's a reference to it when I talk about it. But then we come to nutritional health claims. This regulation came out in 1924, 2006. Suffice it to say, the work started on that in 1990. I was involved in the EU advisory foodstuffs body at that stage. They gave up in despair after about 3 or 4 years discussing it, because they were getting nowhere. They eventually brought it out in 1924, in Regulation 1924/2006. I'm not going to go into it because you'll find the details if you want to make a claim on the foodstuff, not too many of them. It's quite different to the US health claims in particular. Nutrition isn't too bad because that's kind of covered already. That's low fat, rich in this, low on that, and so on. But the health claims is a difficult one. And actually, health claims are accessible on the EFSA website, all of them. I won't even say the number. There's a lot. There's probably about 150 to 100, but they're all very specific. They tell you what you can claim in what product if you meet these criteria, and they're not done necessarily individually. They can address 3 or 4 points and tell you you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't the other, but you can use this one. It comes across everything. My experience in this is that if a product comes from a third country, forget any claim that's made in it already. Just go through tediously and see what somebody wants to claim in the EU. At least half of them you'll be told straight away, fairly quickly, by me or by somebody else, no, you can't do that. No point, that was rejected long ago. You have some chance if you're making a claim on vitamins and minerals. You have no chance at all if you want to make one on probiotics, but then that's nothing new for you in the States because you can't do it either. Canada can do some. Then you have the whole area of protected geographical indications, protected designations of origin, and traditional speciality guarantee regulations. And these are restrictions on specific names. For example, there's a lot of meat products, a lot of fish products, a lot of cheeses, etc. The TSGs are often to do with beers, but that's I'm not going to go into that. Beware, don't try and sell Parmesan in the EU manufactured in the US for a lot of reasons. And then there are other specific legislation, such as the vertical directives and regulations, which may impose specific product labeling requirements. There's quite a few of these for meat. There are not too many for dairy, and everything else you've got to check, are there any, and you've various ways of going through it. I'll come to a little a new thing at the end, which might make life a bit easier for you in that. And only a little bit. Now, this is why we call it the FIC regulation. And I'm not even going to try and read that out. But you can see why it's called the FIC regulation. Because somewhere in there is food information to consumers, and everything else just tells you what was there, what's repealed, and so on like that. Sorry, but that's how the EU does it. So, food information in the EU covers not just what's on the label, it also includes any advertising or promotional information, which could be television, paper, newspaper, media, women's magazines, anything like that. It also includes information on a website. For that reason, many companies, multinational companies, might have one website which might be a .com if it's their US website or whatever, but it would be dot whatever in Europe, and it probably would be .ie or .uk or whatever. UK and IE often got the same because they were English. There's no point in an English website advertising a product, in Germany, on a German website. Though quite often they will help you by having English, an official English translation on your websites as well. But that's for the actual person putting it on the market to decide. And it took over social media. Don't ask me how they do that. I have no idea. But if somebody makes a wrong claim and a competitor sees it, they'll complain, I can tell you. And the social media on behalf of a company may have to disappear. Social media won't disappear. Now, the fundamental principles of labeling, presentation, and advertising of foods in Europe are that it must not mislead the consumer. I could add of the authorities, but anyway. And that is the ordinary consumer who is not has no expertise on reading product labels either. And that has implications, as you'll see. First of all, the labeling has to be clear. Now, that doesn't mean clear that you can read it. It has to be pretty well, state what it has to say and don't pretend it says something else. It has to be unambiguous. That means, you can't write something but really mean something else. It has to be legible and easy to understand. And importantly, it has to be in a language easily understood by the consumers. And that in Europe means in the country on which it is on sale. Multi-language labeling in the EU is a nightmare because you have to decide what country and then what language. And then bear in mind, if you're doing a product in Belgium, it has to be in French and German, but the French and German legislation on the same product could be different to the product legislation in Belgium. So great fun. You have areas, I did a little bit of work at one stage for people who sell products in Belgium. They tend to put it not just in French and Dutch, but also in German, because there's a German-speaking region with significant enough population in part of Germany, or Belgium, sorry. Don't ask me where it is. It's somewhere probably near Maastricht. Now, compulsory information on prepackaged foods. These have to be on the label of prepackaged foods, almost with a full stop after that statement. And I have 3 items there marked with a red asterisk. And what it says is that these 3 items must be on the main, the same field division. One stage it said in one of the directives in English, it said the main field division, but somebody said, well, what's the main field division? So you have the name of the food, and there are the requirements for all these. If there is an EU name for a food, that has to be what the name of the food is. If there isn't, it can be either a descriptive name of what the product is, or a name customary in that country for that product. and they vary significantly from one country to the other. And that's just not linguistically, it can be a name in one country means something else in another country. You have to give a list of ingredients with the allergens highlighted, and I'll give you the reference where all these are that you'll find them. Then there's the quantity of certain ingredients if required. That's spelled out in Article 22, but there's also an annex specifically dealing with that, which is Annex 7. The net quantity for prepackaged foods, that has to be in the same field division as the name of the food, and it has to be in metric units, because metric units are the official units. It can in Ireland or the UK, possibly more in the UK up to now, can be in imperial units as well, but bear in mind it's UK imperial unit, but that is not a requirement. It is something you can do additionally. I'll come back to the minimum durability used by Best Before in a moment, in another slide. It's covered by Article 22, but there's also an annex on it. If there's an annex on specific points there, it means there are a lot of different aspects that you have to take into account in deciding what they are. Minimum durability, I'll come back to, as I said. Any special conditions of storage or use. Then the name or business name and address of the food business operator. Now that is what the regulation says, but that name, business name and address has to be in the EU, in almost all cases anyway. There are very few that I know, that I don't think there are any I know where there are exceptions to that. The next one is the place of origin or place of provenance, if the absence would mislead to a material degree. Now, in fact, at least the place of origin, the country of origin, is now compulsory for meat in the EU. There were proposals, they're still probably being considered, to have it on milk products as well. Some countries have it, but they can only apply it to their own produced products, because produced products that are marketed in their own country, because it would be against mutual recognition otherwise. That can change, and you can, it's a tricky area to get into. Many countries prior to the alignment of legislation in the UK, or sorry, in the EU, had country of origin as part of their legislation. In the move towards the single market for all foods, that was removed. It still remained where you could mislead. I'll just give one example, of course, from the dairy industry, that if you call a product Edam, or if you call a product Gouda, you probably would have to say it was Irish Gouda or UK Gouda or something. You would have to have that it was produced there if it wasn't done in Holland. I think there's an exception for that. That's a very specialized one, and if anybody wants any information on that, you'll just have to come back on it. And then, of course, there are instructions for use as to how you use that product. And that could be to do with reconstitution or heating, or whether you've got to cook it and how you've got to cook it, or whatever, if it's a product. And then just one which is relevant for beverages with greater than 1.2% alcohol by volume. You have to say the alcoholic strength by volume. And the most recent requirement is that now, in most cases, a nutritional declaration is necessary. That wasn't so, and I know it's been that way in the States for quite a while, US for a while, and in Canada and other countries. It's only come in Europe in recent times. I don't go into list of ingredients is difficult because there are ways of there are group names for products which you can use. Very interestingly, in the EU, you don't have to give a list of ingredients for cheese unless it contains other than milk, starter cultures, coagulant, and salt in the case of most ripened cheeses. But if you add a color to it, you have to say there's color there. Interestingly enough, I keep expecting that to disappear from EU legislation. The basis of that was that, well, everybody in Europe knows what cheese is made from. I don't think so, but anyway. But nowadays they tend to use it as a marketing tool and put them down and then say they have 95% milk or 98% milk or something. But that's a bit of detail. That's the ones that you'll have to find out for yourself going through this, really. Then there are the 14 allergens which we have in Europe. Rather than listing them, I found that nice image there because it gives you a little bit more detail. The 14 and just to summarize them, anything containing gluten, celery, crustaceans, which are, crabs, prawns, so on, because people are allergic to them. Then you have fish, because people are allergic to fish. It's nearly always the protein in these things that's the problem. Then you have eggs, because people are allergic to them. Peanuts, of course, I think nearly everybody knows that, because that's why you don't get peanuts on most airline flights now, because people who are anaphylactic as a result of peanuts can have it blowing around in the dust. It'll cause them a problem. You have soya-based products, and it gives a list of some of them there. The regulation doesn't have that detail. It gives a description, but I think this is a nicer one. Cow's milk, but in fact, it's all milk. Cow's milk is probably the main one that people can use. Goats and sheep's milk without problems, but you have to put in there's milk there if there's sheep and goat's milk as well. Nuts, or at least specific nuts, and it will name some of them. Mustard, whether it be mustard seeds, or mustard powders or whatever. And it has notes there which aren't really relevant. That the person who is allergic to mustard may also be allergic to other seed, but anyway, you don't have to name them unless they're here as such. Sesame seeds, lupins. That one always puzzled me as to why it was there, but then I came to realize recently that there's a lupin flour sold for those who might be allergic to gluten, that they have no problems with, but then you have people allergic to gluten as well. And then you have the mollusks, the clams, the oysters, snails, squids, mussels, and so on. How you decide which is crustacean and which is mollusk doesn't really matter, because all you've got to do is to highlight them, that they're there anyway. And finally, sulfur dioxides and sulfides. And these are used as preservatives in many drinks and some foods as well. So again, you have to do that. Now I'm going to give some examples of how you do these, because these are usually more interesting to get to understand some of them. So as regards labeling of allergens, and this is probably in the last 10 or 12 years become very important. For prepackaged foods, allergens can be declared in the ingredient list, but they must be clearly emphasized through a typeset, which clearly distinguishes them from the other ingredients. For example, and it's for example because it's not really a closed list, but font size, font style, underlined or background. Or you can have a separate statement which, if there's no ingredient required, and in fact somebody may, if there was a dairy ingredient put in which doesn't mention milk, would say contains milk. The bane of the lives of the authorities are people who say may contain, or produced in a factory that also produces, peanuts or something like that. I know why it's done. It's done so that you don't end up in being sued by private individuals outside of food law enforcement, and that's okay. But what does it mean? Now, the usual thing is if somebody is really seriously allergenic, or gets an anaphylactic reaction, they will have one of these adrenaline pens or something with them anyway, and they will avoid a lot of these packaged foods. But they're the people who are good at knowing these. But you can see you can do it by bold, or you can do it by underlined, or you can do it by capitals and underlined. This is not a closed list. This just shows how it tends to be done. I said I'd come back to minimum durability, best before or used by. You can see why possibly I used a green font and a red font. Maybe I should use an orange font and a red font, but anyway. Now, the best before date, what it tells you is that it should be used for non-perishable, long shelf life foods, such as dried foods, tinned foods, frozen foods, but very importantly, etc. And it's really, and the use by is really a food safety indicator as opposed to quality. On the best before, well, it mightn't be as good as it was when it was packed, but it won't do you any harm. But it has to be used by if it's a food safety indicator. And these are foods from a microbiological point of view, are highly perishable and are likely after a short period to concentrate in immediate danger to human health. For example, chilled meat products and so on. And it must be followed by a description of the storage conditions which must be observed. These would be things like keep refrigerated, store under 5 degrees centigrade. It would have also you could have something used within 3 days of opening or 5 days of opening or something like that. And there are exemptions for specifying minimum durability on labeling. And these include fresh fruit and vegetables, wines, chewing gum, vinegar, salt, and sugar. And then there's an etc. because there's a longer list in Annex 10 1D. But I just listed some of them. You can see that they are products that are most unlikely to be certainly used by. You could argue about fresh fruit, how quickly it gets damaged or not, but that depends as much on handling as it does how could a manufacturer know how it's going to be handled all the way. And in some cases, particularly in multiples, you know, the supermarket chains and the group chain, they tend to put on display until, but that's not a legal requirement. But again, it's another one of the banes of the lives of the authorities as to what food should be best before and what food should be used by. And then unfortunately, when they produce it, because I like to follow what they say rather than what I might think, they will, you know, they give you the very safe examples of what are long shelf life products. And very safe examples of what are shelf life products as well. There are a lot in between. I mean, if you have a yogurt, you know, fruit yogurt or something, and you have a 14-day shelf life or 18-day shelf life, you know, people might put use by on it. The downside of that is that you cannot, it's illegal to sell if there's use by date on a food which is expired, the food is considered unsafe. And that's under regulation 178/2002, and it must not be sold. In other words, it must be dumped. So that's kind of it should be a counter to putting use by on things that aren't really going to be unsafe, but you want to get them through the system faster. But if you put it on it, that's the consequence, that you have to dump it. It's an offence, and you'll be head up by the authorities for, you know, almost all places. Then there are the formats of the minimum durability. If it's less than 3 months, it's usually okay to put just the day and the month. And again, challenge, I presume, for those of you in the US, if you do the abbreviation with numbers in the EU, the day is always first, then followed by the month, then followed by the year, not month, day, year, as you do. But that's just one of the small things to be aware of. It's if it's between 3 and 18 months, then you can put best before the end of, and then put the month and the year. And then if it's greater than 18 months, it'll usually do to say best before the end of whatever. I've just put in 2022 as an example because it's more than 18, well, it was more than 18 months away at this time, isn't it? Yes, it is 2 years away. So, but usually for use by, it's used by end of day, month, but you can put in year if you want to. You can also put in numbers in the EU, but I felt it might be a bit confusing for you to say that. It is acceptable, but bear in mind there's a greater risk that you'll get it wrong if you're in a country and a region where you put the month first and then today. It is important point at the bottom, even though it's in small print, it's the responsibility of the FBOs to establish the appropriate minimum durability dates of their products, and also to be able to provide validation data for saying, if requested to do so by the competent authorities of EU member states. You can also get some publications by kind of what I would call professional bodies who might tell you for certain products what an appropriate age of durability might be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it will apply to your product. It applies usually to products of that type produced by standard production methods, whatever they are nowadays, because they're usually not specified anyway. Now, a little bit on nutrition declarations. First of all, we'll start with what's on the left there, the mandatory format. So not necessarily all foods, and there are exceptions, and you'll find them in the FIC regulation. But you generally need energy in kilocalories, in kilojoules and kilocalories, both units, and these are per 100 grams. That's the specified way of doing it. You can give the fat in grams, again per 100 grams, or obviously mils if it's mils, but I took that from an actual publication by the Irish Food Safety Authority, just to give examples. And then you give the level of saturates, right? Then you have carbohydrate, of which sugars. So that's the amount of carbohydrate total, and then of which are sugars, and that is, I think, basically sucrose. But I could be wrong on that. Then there's protein, fairly straightforward, again, just in grams, and then salt in grams. Now, it's acceptable to, there was an option, I think, at one stage with sodium in there, but people didn't understand that. And that the sodium figure was low, but it wasn't the amount of salt, it was the amount of sodium. So now you have to put in the amount of salt in grams, but you can use a conversion for that. You don't have to do the formula every time. Then you can also then give mandatory information with supplementary nutritional information. So you can see here that you can give saturates, you can give monounsaturates, and you can give polyunsaturates if you want to, but only the saturates are compulsory. The ones covered in purple, you don't have to show it in purple. It's just done in purple here to show you what's option. And you'll notice there that there's nothing about trans fat levels or whatever, right? That's not allowed in the EU. At least you shouldn't put it on the mandatory information panel, even if it has supplementary information on it. You can give, in addition to sugars, you can give polyols and you can give starch. You can give fiber. It's not compulsory, but you can put fiber in. Protein and salt, compulsory, and then vitamins and minerals. And the units for that are specified in Annex 12 for each of the vitamins and minerals. There is a closed list of them. And you can also give, and also give the percentage of the RI values. And as I said, the RI values are the daily reference intakes. And those daily reference intakes requirements are for each of these are given also in Annex 13. Then you have more options here, because I know very much in other countries, and I think it's in the US, you can give it per portion, and you can in the EU, but it's additional information. And you also say you don't give it per biscuit, you give it per 2 biscuits, because 2 biscuits is normally what somebody eats and so on. But how you do that is a little bit up to you, provided it's clear. You can see per 2 biscuits. this pack contains 10 portions of, 20 biscuits. You're kind of covering yourself on all fronts by not getting into trouble by doing things like that. And you can also give mandatory information with the percentage RI format. All right? You're not required to do it as regards energy, fat, carbohydrate, protein, and salt, and the saturates and sugars in between. You have to do it if you're doing vitamins and minerals. So. You also would have to do it if you were giving a claim on these, but that's probably reasonably clear. And I've just put a note in there, I think it may have been in this already anyway, that the reference intake of the average adult is 8,400 kilojoules and 2,000 kilocalories per day. Oh, sorry, per day. Now, then you have your mandatory information with supplementary nutritional information as regards certain vitamins and minerals. You don't have to give them all, but you can only give the ones that are listed. And these are the ones that are listed, which are shown with the daily reference intake for vitamins and minerals for adults. Again, it gives you the units there. So that's the information that I referred to earlier. This is in Article 13, but it's in the regulation anyway. Now, this is, and this is my, I think, final slide on this one. Literally, in the last week, I came across, I was doing a search for something else, and I came across that the EU now has published, or has made available, a food labeling information system, which is called FLIS, which is just the acronym from Food Labeling Information System. I've given the reference of it there. I've given a summary of what it does. I haven't used this. I don't know how actually good it is. I did one or two quick looks. But it provides a user-friendly IT solution which enables its users to select the food and automatically receive the mandatory EU labeling regulations in 23 EU languages. I don't know which one of was it 2024 I had yesterday, is missing. It may well be Irish. That's all I'm saying. I didn't even check. I should have had a look. Was it there? But there's a drop-down list, so you'll see what languages are there. And in all, it covers 37,000. One second, let's see. Sorry, it covers 87 different categories of food within it. How well it does that, I don't know. Again, I didn't certainly go through all those 87. Its purpose is to enhance the correct implementation of relevant legislation by food businesses and to facilitate the work of national enforcement authorities. It serves purely as a documentation tool and has no legal effect. And there's the usual proviso added that the European Union institutions do not assume any liability for its content. Maybe it's a good way to be on the available to you, but treat it with caution and learn to use it and practice it and so on. As I said, I haven't even had a chance to do this. But it's also intended, because all these are multi-purposes, to contribute to the provision of clear information to consumers and help them to make informed food choices. It may also help them to complain to the authorities if they don't like what they see on that. But anyway, or if they find products that don't use it. So it's, if you like, a help, but it might be a bit of an issue as well. And it also provides links to relevant legal provisions and existing guidance documents. As I said, I haven't used it totally, but it's for labeling purposes. It's not literally for all EU legislation. And it says, and bear in mind what I said earlier about the EU directives, you may also need to consult national provisions transposing directives, which is always a wise thing. I know somebody said that wasn't in their first lot of slides because there was a slight error in the version that was shown yesterday. I added this slide pretty late in the day. So if anybody has any questions on that, as I say, you have it now. Literally, when I was doing it and almost finalized, I hadn't seen that, but I felt it was useful to put it in. So I'll pause at that stage. I've covered a lot of ground today without going into a huge amount of detail and just telling you what's there. I know there have been a few questions flashed up there, Amy. So if you want to take back or unmute your microphone and read some of these out, I'll see what I can do for you.
Perfect, thank you, appreciate that. Let's see, is there a declared amount of salt as an additive or a conversion calculation of the total sodium content?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Is there the question is regarding is there a declared amount of salt or a calculation for the total sodium content?
Yes, there is. I didn't want to quote it off the top of my head, but you multiply by a standard figure, which is whatever the conversion of the molecular weights of sodium to sodium chloride. Okay. If somebody wants, I mean, I can check fairly quickly. I think it's, I don't want to say whether it's 2.5 or 3.5 because I can't remember off the top of my head.
That's fine.
But it's in the annex to the regulation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next question is in regards to a tablet, capsule, scoop. Is it necessary for the nutrition information to be listed in grams, milligrams, or can it be in dose, such as a tablet, 2 capsules, 1 scoop, etc.?
That's a very specific question, which I just give me a second. I see. I just did some notes on this last night, and I may not have it here.
Yes, and the person who asked that question, we do have a number of labeling experts as well, both, of course, FDA, Canadian, EU. So it will be there. The kind of summary that I said that there were additional requirements to what was normally there. Okay.
You see, the thing about nutritional supplements is it certainly has to have what you have to have in the labeling of that basically is, and it includes these, it's not a total list, the names of the categories of the nutrients or substances that characterize the product are an indication of the nature of these substances. The portion of the product recommended for daily consumption. It has to have a warning not to exceed the stated recommended daily dose. It has to have a statement to the effect that food supplements should not be used as a substitute for a varied diet, and a statement to the effect that the products should be stored out of the reach of young children. So for the rest, as regards nutritional labeling, I'll have to check.
Okay, perfect. The last question is in regards to coconut. The US considers it part of the tree nut category, but how does the EU classify it?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. The actual EU, again, 1169/2011 has a definition of all these products. So they have a detailed list, I think. I can check that out, and I'll give you feedback after this if you like, and you can pass it on to the person who asked.
Very good, thank you. Let's see. And then Alan, I see you've unmuted your mic. I know you're here just briefly before you head to a webinar that you're presenting, but you had a comment on labeling also?
I did. First of all, I apologize. I will not be able to stay for the entire presentation, which is outstanding.
Alan, we can barely hear you if you wouldn't mind speaking up.
Okay, I'm going to, is this better, Amy?
A little bit.
I apologize. I'm definitely having headset problems we'll have to deal with. But first of all, Michael, thank you. This is outstanding. I'm sorry I won't be able to join for the rest of the presentation. My question, could you just restate briefly the language issues? I know you covered it, but it may be worth restating. If I'm exporting a food product that is ready to eat for consumers in the EU, Do I have to have 10 languages, 8 languages? Can you just quickly restate that? Thank you.
I think I got that question, and of course it's a good one. Unfortunately, it means that if you want to sell that product in a member state, in any member state, there will have to be labeling on that product, which is understood by the consumers in that member state. And the best way of, well, that doesn't mean that everybody is to understand it. I mean, if you've got somebody living in Germany who's only a Spanish speaker and can't understand anything else, you're obviously not required to do that, but you certainly would have to have it in German. And I can tell you from experience, and I see it every couple of weeks, that there are products which our Food Safety Authority in Ireland say have to withdrawn or is withdrawn by agreement with whoever's put it on, because something or another is not labeled in a language which will be understood, which in Ireland is English. So that's why I said earlier, multilingual labeling in Europe is a nightmare. Yes, you may cover certain countries. You open yourself to the possibility that there may be particular requirements, if it's a directive, in one country which don't apply to another, even if they use the same language. So in simple terms, if you market a product in Germany, make sure it's labeled in German. If you sell a product want to sell a product in Belgium, make sure it's labeled in French and Flemish, Dutch at least. If you sell a product in Denmark, make sure it's in Danish. If you sell it in Greek, well, you have to have it in Greek. And I didn't mention, of course, that we have 3 alphabets as well. In the EU, we have the Latin alphabet, which is A, B, C, D. We have the Greek alphabet, which is alpha, beta, gamma, blah, 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 which is a different structure. And then you have the Cyrillic, and don't ask me to go through that alphabet because I don't know any of the letters. But it's grand to say if you sell it in one member state, you have to sell it. You can sell it in any other. As a general term, that's right, but that doesn't mean that you can sell it with the same labeling. And you'll know that fairly quickly if you just try a few things out on that tool that I gave you.
Okay, perfect. I don't see any other questions at this time, so I will mute and continue.
Okay, yeah, I'll go on. Sorry, can I just come back, because on that question on labeling, there's also on the supplement, it says the label must declare the amount of the nutrients or substances with a nutritional or physiological effect present in the product, and these must be declared in numerical form and per portion of the product as recommended for daily consumption. And the information on vitamins and minerals must be expressed as a percentage of the reference intake values listed in the Annex 13. So I think the answer is you don't have necessarily to, probably you don't have to give the full one, but you certainly have to give the information on the substance. You see, a supplement is not a complete food, but a substance supplement is regarded as a food, but it's not a complete food. So, quite often a supplement probably wouldn't affect your calorie intake. I wouldn't affect your protein intake. I wouldn't affect your, I leave fat out of it for the moment. Your carbohydrate intake, it might do carbohydrate intake, but the quantity you'll be taking will be quite small. But what you have to know is how much vitamins and minerals you're taking in, or how much, substances that may have a limit that you wouldn't want exceeded, as well as anything else. And, to take an example of a product with this stanol or sterol cholesterol reducing substance in it, you don't want to overconsume that either. So, you need to know how much of that is in. Okay, we'll move on. And I'm going to do a very small bit on contaminants. And that's covered in the EU by Regulation 1881/2006. It's, of course, consolidated as well. This has 9 sections, addressing nitrates, mycotoxins, metals, and the metals it addresses are lead, cadmium, mercury, tin, organic tin, inorganic tin, and arsenic. 3-MCPD, because I'm not going to get all the other word right, that's a long version of it, and glycidyl fatty acid esters. Another part of the section covers dioxins and PCBs, the polycarbonated biphenyls. Then there's the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, the ones that are probably tied up with overheating products and that kind of thing. Melamine and analogs, I think everybody knows why that came in. And then there are inherent plant toxins like erucic acid, propane alkaloids, and hydrocyanic acids, and perchlorate is another one. Now, within these, there are also MRLs set for all of the relevant foods where they're considered a risk in Europe. They're not necessarily covering everything, they're only the ones, in most cases. There are a few that are general sweep ones, but some of them are specific. I mean, for example, at least in the EU, mercury is mainly a problem for fish products and so on like that. But you'll find it all in the sections thereafter. That's really all I'm going to say on that. And I haven't covered separate legislation covering pesticide residues and residues of veterinary drugs, which are far more complicated if somebody is doing plant products in one case, particularly for products of animal origin, because there are differences between EU legislation and US legislation as regards particularly levels of veterinary residues, and that would include the use of hormones and the use of things like that in products. I am going to mention the food contact materials, and there isn't a huge amount to go of now, so people are getting worried about overshooting time too much today either. Food contact materials and articles. The short name for that, because it's a long word, is FCMs. Because I'm not aware of legislation in other countries in this. It may well be there, I just don't know of it. But it's one that has taken on a lot of steam in Europe in the last number of years. And there's a list of different types of food contact materials mentioned there. You have active and intelligent materials, which are called AIM, and related articles. You have adhesives, you have ceramics, you have cork, you have glass, you have ion exchange resins, you have metal and alloys, you have paper and board, you have plastics, you have printing inks and colors, you have regenerated cellulose, you have rubbers, you have silicones, you have textiles, varnishes, coal, waxes, and wood. Now, the ones in red also have special additional requirements covering them. That's why I have them in red, just to show it. There are general rules that apply to all materials and articles, and there are specific rules that apply only to particular materials, and that's the ones that are highlighted in red there. I don't name them all there, but they're all in the actual list. And then there are also a series of specific measures which apply to individual substances or groups of substances used in the manufacture of materials and articles. And these include such as, elastomers or rubber teats and soothers, the release of N-nitrosamines and N-nitrosable substances. The requirement here is that FBOs at all stages, from packaging manufacturers and suppliers to retailers, have responsibility for ensuring that their FCMs in their businesses are compliant with the legislation, and information on FCMs must be incorporated into their traceability systems. This is a difficult and complex area and requires a lot of expertise that I don't necessarily have, but it's still there. There are two general regulations, 1935-2004, and the other one is Commission regulation 2023/2006. sorry, 2023, because that's not a year number, 2006 was a year. And that's on GMP for materials in articles to come into contact with food. And then there are specific measures on, as I said, ceramic articles, active and intelligent materials, plastic materials, materials containing certain epoxy derivatives, regenerated cellulose film, and recycled plastic materials in articles. And I give you cross-references to those, 2 of which are directives and 3 of which are regulations. Is it 3? 1, 2, sorry, 4, which are regulations. I've highlighted the capital letters because some people remember them by using the word caper, even though there really are 2 R's at the end, because you've regenerated and then you have recycled. Now, I give a reference there to food contact materials. It's a brochure produced by our Irish FSAI that expands a lot on that, and a hell of a lot better than I could do on it. It's dated 2014 and it's quite up to date. Now, a little bit on Regulation 1935, 2004. It applies to the materials and articles, including all the other ones, in their finished state, which are intended to be brought into contact with food, are already in contact with food and were intended for that purpose, or can reasonably expected to be brought into contact with food, or to transfer their constituents to food under normal or foreseeable conditions. Legalese wording, I'm afraid, but it's easier to use that than to try and interpret what it means. And it requires that material and articles and so on are in compliance with good manufacturing practice, so that under normal or feasible conditions of use do not transfer the constituents to food in quantities which could endanger health, bring about unacceptable change to the food, bring about deterioration in the organic characteristics of the food, and specifies the labeling and traceability, which basically is 1 step up and 1 step down in your case, but you've got to make sure that you know who your contact is, but you've also got to get information from them. I'll come back to why that can be difficult at the very end. So in assessing compliance, and this is just a nice diagram, I think it's in that the FSAI document, Food Standards Authority of Ireland document. The various 4 questions, if you like, on food contact material. Is it safe? Is it properly labeled? Is it covered by a specific measure? And is it traceable? And you can pick these 4 in whatever order you like. Now, quite often, and I know people get these, you get a questionnaire from a supplier. You'll almost certainly get them from customers of your products in the EU. They will ask you, do you comply with all the requirements of the European legislation on food contact materials? And it's possible that you'll say, with what? What's that? So I've just given you a list of them there. I'm not going to try and explain to them because they're highly technical and so on. And I'll address that at the very end as to how you might be able to do that. Now I'm going to do a little bit of national legislation versus EU legislation. Very much top level stuff. I sometimes get asked, yeah, I've got a copy of regulation such and such and such and such, but if I want to sell a product in Germany, do I have to comply, with anything else? Now, the kind of good news is that if it's a regulation, you don't have to worry about too much else. There's always a little warning on that, but there may well be, people who will make it difficult for you. If it's a directive, and as you saw there in the example where it mentioned it as regards a directive on that food labeling information system, if it's a directive, and that may help you in that regard, I don't know because I haven't tried it out. You may have to check national legislation in the country because it's mainly to do with the implementation. The objectives will be the same, but the specifics may well differ. So anyway, a little bit, just to go through this, there's quite a lot, but not necessarily all EU legislation is harmonized at the EU level. Almost all horizontal legislation is harmonized. You can never say in the EU all because you'll always find exceptions. But things like food safety, food labeling, food additives, food hygiene, nutritional labeling, nutritional health claims, contaminants, residues, novel foods, GMOs, etc., are regulated at European level. most of these nowadays by regulation. We came across the example of supplements. I also mentioned the original nutritional labeling one was a directive, and on the FMCs, some of the specifics regulations are directive. Harmonized legislation includes the adoption of possibly divergent national rules, but they're there to, precludes the adoption of possibly divergent national rules. Now, there's a difference between divergent and identical, particularly as regards directives, not so much in regulations. They apply, they can't do anything outside it. Food additives, you'll find some of the others may be a bit more difficult. The main unharmonized legislation is in the area of vertical product compositional standards. In the US, you have a lot of those in the Code of Federal Regulation. In the EU, you haven't very many at all. We could never agree on, what have you, 63 individual cheese standards in the EU? Alan will smile when he hears that because he went through some of that disagreement, as did I. And many of the biggest rows were between two European countries, I can tell you as well. Where there is no harmonized legislation, food law may be subject to different national rules in member states. That's under the principle of subsidiarity, which means that, you know, the legislation, and this comes under the treaties, should be at the lowest level to achieve the purposes for which it's intended. Yes, very nice statement, right? It also may fit into where they can't get agreement. Now, where legislation has not been harmonized at EU level, however, the principle of mutual recognition should guarantee the free movement of goods in the EU. And that is important. What is the principle of mutual recognition? Mutual recognition applies to products that are not or are only partly subject to EU harmonization legislation, and where member states may have differing national legislation for products. The principle is based, originally at least, on the decision of the EU Court of Justice in the Caisse de Dijon case, which was 1979, between Rave Central and the Bundes, whatever. That's one of the German governing organizations in Germany. As regards Caisse de Dijon, which is a blackcurrant liqueur made in France, but it didn't meet the definition of a liqueur in Germany because it didn't have enough alcohol. The basic decision from, or the consequence in mutual recognition is that food products lawfully produced or marketed in one member state should be allowed to be marketed in any other member state. Now that's fine until the language business and other things come in, but that principle is there. It's usually fine. It's often brought in fact, in national legislation. Does anybody totally understand what that means? I don't think so is the answer to that, even though a lot of people might claim they know about it, because that's why cases go to the EU. They generally uphold decisions on that basis, though. That seems to be the case, but there are exceptions to that. Now, there are situations where member states can make exceptions in cases where the member state can prove serious public safety, health, and or environmental concerns about a product. There's a new regulation on mutual recognition of goods lawfully marketed in number member state and repealing an earlier regulation on this. I haven't really gone through it. It's recently adopted, and it outlines rules and procedures on the application of mutual recognition principles in individual cases. If it arises, you really just have to see what's in that and does it help you or not. But in many cases, it works. Some countries better than others. Now, that really is all I want to say on that. You could go on about the whole area of national legislation, the EU legislation. It's really something you have to look at on a case-by-case basis. There is no broad brush stuff that I can do in a course like this that will cover it. Right, my last few slides are on Brexit, because what's happening with Brexit? And the answer is, what's happening with Brexit? Do we still know? But we know a little bit more than we did 3 or 4 weeks ago. That's about all I'll say at the moment. But a little bit of background for those of you that don't know. In a referendum held in June 2016, the UK voted to leave the EU. The UK does not, I don't say this, the UK does not go in for referenda or referendums. I think both are acceptable nowadays. They only have had about 4 ever. And 3 of these were to do with whether they never voted to, had a vote to a referendum to join the EU. They did have a vote to stay in the EU back in the late 1970s, carried quite comfortably. And then they had the one in June 2016, which voted to leave. However, if you go through the details, it wasn't all just a simple vote on whether the UK should leave the EU or not. There were a whole heap of other things besides trade came into it anyway. I won't go into it. Then on 29th March 2017, the UK formally notified the EU of the country's intention to withdraw, beginning the Brexit process. As was said at the time, that starts the clock ticking and has a 2-year limit to make any agreement. However, since late June 2017, which was only a couple of months after, the UK and the EU had been negotiating their future relationship, which should also include what, if any, trade agreements will be agreed between them. In November 2018, the UK and the EU negotiators agreed text of a draft withdrawal agreement. The withdrawal was originally scheduled for the 29th of March 2019. However, this deadline was delayed due to difficulties in having the withdrawal agreements approved by the UK Parliament, and the deadline was extended on 3 occasions, at least 3 separate occasions. Won't go into why on the internal UK politics as to why that happened, but that was the result. Then finally, following approval by Parliament of the withdrawal agreement, I think it was in the 27th or 28th of December last, the EU finally left the EU on the 31st of January, sorry, the UK left on the 31st of January 2020 and indicated that the transition period as referenced in that withdrawal agreement would end at 11 p.m. on New Year's Eve this last year gone by. So you can see, I think that slide changed about 5 times in the last month, but that now is, the UK has left and the fun has started. This is their timetable. I won't go through that in detail, but you know, you have the information there. I took that from, I don't know. Oh, sorry. Yes, it was used by Michel Barnier, who was the leading the EU Commission's proposal. That was the Commission's proposal for a Council recommendation on directives as to how to deal with that partnership. UK. It only dates from February 2020, and it still went beyond that. That's an EU one. I don't think it's particularly biased, but anyway. So during the transition period, the UK remained subject to EU law and remains part. These actually wording has now changed, but they remain part of the EU customs union and the single market up to the 31st of December last. Then, following the negotiations on that period from March 29th, 2017 to the 24th of December 2020, a period of 1367 days. Bear in mind, it was supposed to be within 2 years. An agreement was reached between the UK and the EU negotiators. And this has now been agreed by the 27 EU member states and by the UK Parliament. The UK Parliament. Approval by the UK Parliament may take about 1 or 2 months, but that is not expected to be an issue. I say that as a reasonable statement of fact without being absolutely sure, because you never know. The total agreement runs to 1,246 pages. But there are also summary side agreements and additional political declarations and sensitive issues to consider also. The final sticking points were fishing rights, particularly as regards the access of EU fishing fleets to UK territorial waters. What was referred to as the level playing field, that is, a common situation as regards state aids and subsidies, workers' rights, environmental standards and workplace standards. And also how, the governance of the withdrawal would be handled from, and how dispute resolution would take place if agreement is broken. The UK didn't help because they said that they were going to ignore parts of that. And finally, just to mention, because you'll have heard of it, the Northern Ireland Protocol means that there will be no customs checks at land borders between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which is the only land border between the EU and a non-EU member state. Any trade for the continental Europe is through ports, which is a bit easier. The Irish border is not patrollable. Now, these are some of the agreement details. Don't necessarily quote these as fact, because every time I read them, they're minor quirks to that. But what I understand, the main thing is there to be no tariffs or quotas on trade between the EU and the UK and vice versa. That doesn't mean there aren't challenges. There are huge challenges, but anyway. There will have to be new customs and regulatory checks, especially as regards SPS standards, that's sanitary and phytosanitary, which means animal products and plant products, with increased red tape. But the free movement of goods between EU and UK is now ended. The level playing field is to be achieved through a principle of management divergence. If anybody understands what principle of management divergence means, good luck to you. Both sides reserve the right to retaliate if they believe the other side has gained an unfair competitive advantage. In my book, it's bound to happen, because the UK are going to do something that will cause the thing to break. On fishing rights, which by the way is a very small amount of trade, but very important, because it was UK had a whole series of red lines, and they promised they wouldn't let their fishermen down. And we've ended with a situation where the EU fishermen say the EU let them down, and the UK fishermen say equally vehemently that they were let down by these. But the EU is supposed to give up 25% of its existing quotas in UK territorial waters over a 5.5-year period. It won't even go into UK territorial waters. There's been fun in that, and there's been fun in the past. And there'll be fun many times to come, I think. On resolution of disputes, well, first they try and do it by consultation, then by an arbitration panel, goodness knows who will be on that, and then by tariffs. The UK insisted that the European Court of Justice would not be involved. The UK had despised the European Court of Justice because they lost every case they brought there nearly. And a little bit on the Northern Ireland Protocol, and this I think is right. Northern Ireland will continue to apply the EU single market rules for and on agriculture and manufactured goods, while at the same time remaining in the UK customs territory. Right? The logic of that is strange. That would, but there were a lot of political things came into that. This means that some checks will be undertaken on products as they cross the Irish Sea from Britain to Northern Ireland, to ensure that EU safety standards, particularly in the area of food and live animals, and that Northern Ireland will continue to enforce EU customs codes at its ports. This has already caused problems, even in the number of days, because certain products are finding a lot of difficulty going from the UK to Northern Ireland, from Britain, sorry, to Northern Ireland. Going from Northern Ireland to Britain is no problem, because that's the UK's problem. And now a little bit on Brexit statistics. The population of the EU 27, the remaining ones, 455 million. The UK population, 68 million. I'm only giving these as figures. I'm not reading anything into them. You can read what you like into them. The total value, the share of UK trade with the EU in the period 1999 to 2019. The imports were 341 billion. The exports, 274 billion. The source of that is the House of Commons library, which I couldn't find it anywhere else. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just that's a UK source. These are some figures which basically I compiled from a number of places. But the EU agricultural exports, agricultural products exports to the EU, total value in 2017 was 40 billion. Made up of probably the largest single category, fresh and processed fruit and vegetables, followed by food preparations and meat products, followed by wines, spirits and beverages, followed by dairy products. But of course, larger than any of them were the famous others. The UK was always, and goodness knows what it will be and always a valuable market for Irish products. The share of UK agri imports from the EU 27, you can see how that's made up there. Fresh fruit and vegetables, it's sort of, dairy products is very high there. The UK is very, very low in self-sufficiency as regards dairy products. The UK agri imports as well, shown from the European countries and the rest of the world, the largest EU countries, and you can see them there. You can see that Netherlands, France, and Ireland, and Denmark are the biggest ones. Sorry, Germany is it? I'm not sure. That may be a mistake. That might be Germany or it might be Denmark. I'm not sure. But you know, there are only about 8, 9 countries mentioned there. The others are smaller than that. UK agri exports to the EU, most of them to Ireland, but also significant amounts to France, Netherlands, Germany, and probably Spain. The Spanish ones are probably for English tourists to holidaying in Spain, but anyway. So now that's basically it. That's really all I intend to do on that. I'm coming to my penultimate slide, I think. Just some key takeaways, maybe. And I kind of pick ones from the various headings. Under the General Food Law, the responsibility to ensure that food is safe rests with the food business operator to place its product on the EU market. Due diligence must be followed to ensure this, and that's really throughout the chain, and it'll be passed back to you. Under EU food additive legislation, the food additive functional classes, together with either the E number or the specified food additive name, must be given in food labeling. The legislation, as we discussed, though found in maybe just 2 regulations, is complex and can be difficult to grasp. Food labels for the US and the EU market are not the same. It can be costly in time and labor when attempting to get this right first time for the EU market. Does that FLIS help? I don't know. The requirements, what I tend to do when I've done that in the past is just start with a list, you know, go through my checks on all of the required headings, check out the ingredients because the names can be different. You know, if you put in canola oil in the EU, it won't mean anything. You would call that rapeseed oil in the UK. It would imply that it's low erucic acid rapeseed oil, because it would be illegal to have rapeseed oil with higher levels of erucic acid. And it will also raise questions of GMOs, which, you know, even though it's not illegal in the EU, causes a lot of customer resistance. The requirements as regards hygiene and food safety, especially for products of animal origin, is quite challenging, and any mistakes can be costly, and the risks of rejection at the port of rejection at the port of entry. That happens both ways, of course, not just between, you know, we'll say the US and the EU, or between Canada and the EU. It can also happen going from the EU to these countries if they don't breach the agreements, and in fact come from, in the case of animal products, from plants that are approved by the other side. The MRLs for contaminants, pesticides, and veterinary drug residues, and we didn't discuss the last two, in the EU can be more strict than for other markets. And I just mentioned the examples of things like lead, aflatoxin N1 in milk and so on, but they can often in Europe be 10% lower. They follow the principle of as low as reasonably achievable, but they also use the precautionary principle, which means that if they can get adequate supplies within Europe at a lower level than the normal codex or whatever levels, then they will set their level at MRLs at the level that can be met. And just on FCMs, and I mentioned that, many EU food businesses require information from their suppliers as regards their packaging meeting the requirements of EU legislation and food contact materials. Such requests may also require or request sorts of analysis to confirm compliance. Unless you have someone with very good knowledge of packaging vis-a-vis the EU legislation, you will certainly not need external expertise in this, either from your suppliers or from independent experts on this topic. And then finally, don't be reluctant to seek help and advice from those with specialized knowledge in EU legislation. It's always better to be sure than sorry. And of course, EAS Consultancy Group can usually help you on this through their wide network of independent consultants such as myself. Now that more or less finishes me. Thank you very much for your attention. It gives any questions, and you have my contact details there, and Alan Sailors as well in EAS, who is an executive and a senior executive with EAS Consulting, and you can contract through him if you want anything from me or from anybody else. And back to you, Amy.
Great, thank you so much. And working on looking at all of these questions here. We do have one comment from someone that slide number 99 was not in the original deck. And my apologies for that. Michael did send an updated slide deck yesterday afternoon, which I did not forward. So I will do that after the conclusion of today's seminar. Let's see. The first question in our newest batch is the labeling, does the labeling regulation apply if we are selling business to business, or does it concern only business to consumer?
The food labeling requirements, as I outlined them there, are what is required on prepackaged foods usually. There are provisions in it for non-prepackaged foods as well, which are less restrictive. But the challenge you have is that your customers in Europe, the people you supply in Europe, will need you to give them the information that they require to have proper labeling on their product. So, you know, if you have a very detailed, more likely you will, specification, which can run to 10, 12, 14 pages in my experience from European customers, they will usually have covered a lot of the requirements, but they may well get back to you looking for additional information. So, you know, there's basic information that you have to require for business to business and to import products into the EU, but it's important, I think, that all of you know the information that they will want in Europe, and that's why you'll be asked for it, and not just to make life very difficult for you.
Okay, our next question, can you explain what novel foods are and their regulatory status?
Yes, there's a regulation on novel foods, which defines it as a product not already on the market in the EU from a date in 1996, off the top of my head. Yeah, again, I can dig out the actual regulation and why, because that's when it was brought in. I think it was 1996. It could have been slightly later than that. And there is a list of those foods that have been approved ever since. So I think one of the great examples that was given in the past was kiwi fruit. You know, kiwi fruit, I think in the EU had to be approved as a novel food because it wasn't on the, even though it was a well-recognized food worldwide, it hadn't been on the EU market before then, and you could brought it in. But if you look up novel foods in EU, there's a website, and you'll find lists of such foods that have been approved. And I think probably a list of foods that haven't been approved on the EFSA and our EU website are both. If you look up the FSAI website in Ireland, and I'm only mentioning that because A is pretty good, B is fairly easy to follow, and C, most importantly, it's in English. They have a labeling section, and if you click on that labeling section, one of your options will be novel foods.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question, are you able to share how people can check about certain vitamin allowances and certain foods?
Are you talking about adding minerals and vitamins to foods to increase their levels, like vitamin A or vitamin D or so on?
Possibly, that was her only question.
If the answer, if that is the question, the answer is yes. Now, I think it's probably a directive because the rules may differ from country to country. You see, nutritional, the dietary habits from, we'll say, Sweden in the north to Ireland and in the west to Poland and the East European states, and then to the Mediterranean states, is quite different. So in certain countries, you do have issues with deficiencies, or indeed you could have too high levels as well of certain vitamins and minerals. So it's very difficult to have a common EU requirement on it. So you would have to check for the various countries, but there is I think it's a directive on it that I can give you the link. If you send me that one, I'll come back to you on it, Amy, and you can pass it on.
Okay, certainly, thank you. I don't see any other questions at this time. Of course, I'll remind everyone, if you have further questions or would like assistance from EAS with regards to EU or Canadian, US, any food regulations, we'll be glad to help. You'll see Alan Saylor's address at the bottom of the slide here. He's the quickest point of contact for that. I noticed I did not include the .com in Michael Hickey's email address, so be sure to include that if you do email him directly. Let's see, we've got one comment that just.
Yes, I think I saw that one. It's on paper.
Yeah.
The answer is there probably isn't, but there's the possibility that it might be there at some stage.
Okay, great. And I do see one additional question, and that is, when can legally binding regulation be expected? Oops, it's a long question, so every time I tab down, it removes the second part of the question. Okay, let's see.
I may be able to call this up myself if you just.
Yeah, when can we expect legally binding regulation for paper packaging in the EU and the UK?
Well, the UK I can't answer for now because they've left the EU, but and will they amend it? I don't know. The UK very much went into wanting, they're talking about sovereignty, which bringing back sovereignty to the UK Parliament. Well, for reasons of history, many Irish people smiled at that, and many people in other countries smiled as well because they were a colonial power for many years. You never know with the EU. You can usually through associations, and I think there's EU Packaging Association of some kind. I can dig the name of it out. They will usually be involved in consultation processes, and they will be the source of the information on it. Yeah, I've seen there that they rely heavily on the German BFR recommendation, and that's not legally binding. That's fine. The actual you could use that in the EU if anybody challenged you and said that you were using that as a legal basis, and that would possibly help you as regards due diligence. So when can you expect? I don't know. I can check it out, but I'll see if there's anything floating around.
Okay, and they have a follow-on question, and that is, do processing aids that are used by consumers manufacturer SCMs need to be compliant with 1935/2004?
Simple answer to that from my part, which is absolutely no use for the person that answered. I don't know.
Okay.
That's one that I would have checked out. I've kind of not really got involved in this packaging area because it's, you know, you really need to have a background in the packaging industry to understand these.
Okay, great. I appreciate that.
You see, there's a certain amount of, EU consumers wanting to demonstrate due diligence by asking a question which they have no idea whether there is an answer to or not,
Mhm.
right? And I think that might be an example of that.
Yeah.
The main issue as regards food contact materials are, you know, it started with the plastic industry, and you had monomer risk of monomer transfer to foods from the packaging. I think a lot of these in the EU side will be solved. I know absolutely nothing about any of the North American, whether there's an equivalent legislation or not on packaging materials.
Okay, great.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can't be of more help on that one. And as I said, there are areas that if you use some legislation in the EU that does exist, you at least are doing a kind of a due diligence thing and saying, well, we comply with that. You may get the answer back, but it's not legally binding. No, it's not, but you are at least doing due diligence to see what might be appropriate or something like that. The Germans have an awful lot of legislation that the EU doesn't necessarily have.
Okay, any final questions out there?
My apologies for going over time a bit today. We had a lot of ground to cover, and
Absolutely, and it sure shows how complicated the topic is.
yeah, even at a basic level.
Right, exactly. Okay, I don't see anything else coming in, so let me thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for sticking with us. A lot of good information. EAS will be, of course, more than glad to help if we can. Just feel free to reach out to us, and I will provide the updated slide deck in just a moment. Thanks so much, and have a great day, everyone.
And same for me. Have a great day, and go safely.
Thank you. All right, bye.
Bye-bye.